It will take action to ensure that in the long run it makes an economic profit. Remember, the monopoly, although it faces a downward sloping demand curve, can decide what price it's going to charge. And because it is the only supplier, customers don't have a choice except to go to it if they want that product. So therefore the question is asking you, why does this not apply to Eskom? Because Eskom definitely is not in the position of making a profit. So what are problems that have led to Eskom consistently making a loss and having to be bailed out by the government? So here are some ideas. Okay, there's just a picture there to help you a little bit as well. Right, so Eskom is a government monopoly. Grade 12's another term that you might come across for government monopoly is a state-owned enterprise. So just make sure you're familiar with that term. Eskom has experienced major losses due to, so here are your reasons: state capture, corrupt officials, mismanagement, overstaffing, and improper deals. Okay, so those are some of the things you could say for this question. What else has got in the way of Eskom making a profit? Building 2 new coal-powered power stations which have run over budget and are not operational. Electricity theft. Municipalities which do not pay their electricity bills. Neglected maintenance leading to constant breakdowns, which we have all experienced, in other words, load shedding. So those are some of the answers that you could put down as to why Eskom has not made a profit in the long run, like other monopolies, rather. And then the last sentence I've got here, grade 12, government's financial health contributes to a large extent to the survival of this parastatal. So remember, every year in budget, money has been put aside to bail Eskom out of these financial difficulties. And remember, that is problematic because that is money that could have been spent on service delivery, but it is now going to help Eskom. Right, I'll just give you a minute to take some of those points down as to why Eskom did not realize a profit in the long run. Alright guys, I've had a request just to go back to question 9.2. So I'm not sure if there were maybe some technical difficulties, but no problem. Let's go back to question 9 again. And we'll just go through it again, that's not a problem. Okay. So remember what we were talking about in question 9, grade 12s, was the perfect market. So this is the graph that you were given. And this question was primarily about the shutdown point. But let's just get started again and go through the questions one by one. So the first question was identify the market price. Now, if I go back to the graph, grade 12s, you can see that there are a number of prices here. Remember, for a perfect competitor, long-term equilibrium is making a normal profit. And that will be at a price of 40 Rand, which you can see from this graph, because that is where average revenue, which remember is equal to price, is equal to average cost. So grade 12's your answer for question 9.2.1 is 40 Rand, because that is the long-term equilibrium position where this perfect competitor will make a normal profit. All right, let's go on to the next question. At what point does marginal cost intersect average cost? So let's go back to our graph. So here's my marginal cost curve, here's my average cost curve, and you can see that that is at point B. Okay, so that is the answer to 9.2.2. 9.2.3 is our definition question. Briefly describe the term break-even point. This is the point where average revenue is equal to average cost, or total revenue is equal to total cost. And it's the point where the firm is making a normal profit. So in our example, in this graph, this would be at a price of 40 Rand. So I'll just give you a moment to make sure everyone's got that down. All right, what happens at point D, everybody? We just go back and have a look at the graph. Point D is where average revenue, over here, is equal to average variable cost. And that is going to be my shutdown point. So remember, your shutdown point is at point D, where average variable cost is equal to average revenue. Right, so point D is known as the shutdown or close down point. You can use either one of those terms, they are both correct. It's when marginal cost intersects average variable cost at its lowest point. This is where the supply curve of the firm begins. Remember, the supply curve of your perfect competitor is the marginal cost curve above the shutdown point. The market price, which is the same as average revenue, is so low that the business is only, that should be only, not inly, able to pay its average variable cost. So I'll just give you a minute to take that down. All right, everybody, let's continue to 9.2.5. The question is, explain what would happen if the market price increased to 50 Rand. So let's go and have a look at our graph and see what happens. So if market price increased to 50 Rand over here, remember this now will indicate my average revenue. I take my average revenue, which is also the marginal revenue curve, I go across until I intersect the marginal cost curve, I will get to point A. So if the market price increased to 50 Rand, this firm would produce a quantity of 400. In other words, it would expand its quantity because it is now receiving a higher marginal revenue for each additional unit produced, so it can expand its production and its margin marginal cost and produce at point A. And at this point, grade 12s, the firm is making an economic profit because average revenue, which is 50, is greater than average cost, which is just about 40, maybe slightly higher than 40. So the firm would be making an economic profit at a price of 50 Rand. And that would be at point A. Remember, at point B, the firm was making a normal profit because average cost was equal to average revenue. So let's put that all into a few sentences. If the market price increases to 50 Rand, the marginal cost curve intersects, this should be the average revenue curve at point A. Okay, please change that. Point A lies above the average cost curve. This means that if the market price is above the average cost curve, the business will increase production to 400. The business will make an economic profit at a market price of 50 Rand because average revenue is greater than average cost. So please just change this, make sure you change this average cost to average revenue. So essentially the firm will increase production to 400 units and it will make an economic profit at a price of 50 Rand. All right, everybody. I hope everyone has got that and we can continue. Let's go on to our next question, which is question number 10, all about the minimum wage. Before I go on, I've just put in these 3 diagrams of the different equilibrium positions for a perfect competitor. They are taken from Mind the Gap. And remember, I will give you a link where you can find an electronic PDF copy of Mind the Gap. It really is a very useful resource. I'll give that to you at the end. So remember, for an economic profit, average revenue is greater than average cost at the profit maximization point. For an economic loss, which we discussed earlier this morning in our multiple choice questions, average revenue is below average cost. And then when the firm makes a normal profit, average revenue equals average cost. And you can see that in the 3rd diagram on the page. So grade 12, it's really useful for you to draw these diagrams and to become familiar with them so that when you get a question like this, you understand exactly what you're looking at. Alrighty, let's get on to the minimum wage, guys. So question 10, minimum wage. This comes from the section on market failures. Remember, the minimum wage is one of the ways that the government can try and redistribute income and wealth from the rich to the poor. And remember, one of the market failures is that there is an uneven distribution of income and wealth. That is one of the results of market failure. And this question is about the minimum wage, which is how government can try to correct that. Right, so let's have a look at the extract. So it says minimum wage increase. The legislation stipulates a minimum national rate of 20 Rand per hour or 3,500 Rand per month, depending on the number of hours worked. The 20 Rand an hour rate will be phased in slowly in the agricultural and domestic work sectors, with workers earning 18 and 15 Rand respectively. So in other words, the extract is saying is the minimum wage is 20 Rand, but for agricultural workers they will earn 18 Rand an hour, and domestic workers 15 Rand an hour, until the 20 Rand can be phased in for agricultural and domestic workers. Right, so that's what the minimum wage is. That's what our extract says. So let's go to the questions. Right, which department is implementing the minimum wage? Well, let's think about it. Wages are to do with workers, and what is the correct economics term for workers? That is labor. So the first answer, grade 12s, is the Department of Labor. Right, the second one. So remember, earlier on we had a question on unemployment, and one of the questions was, what is the current unemployment rate? And you might not have known that. And this next question falls to the same category, grade 12s. There are some things that you might not be aware of, and that is why it is so important as an economics student for you to watch the TV news or listen on the radio, or make sure you have a look on news websites or look at newspapers. It's very important to be up to date with current affairs with regard to economics, because you can get questions like this in the exam. So if you didn't know, the minimum wage came into effect on the 1st of January 2019. So again, you need to have a basket of general knowledge that you can draw on to answer these types of questions. So please keep up to date with current affairs. Right, then we've got our definition question, and you guys should all get these correct. What is the minimum wage? It's the lowest wage permitted by government to be paid in all industries. And as we can see from the extract, it's different for different industries. So I'll just give you a minute to make sure you've got that down. Right, everybody, next question, 10.2.4. How would workers benefit from minimum wages? So you guys have all done a diagram on the minimum wage in this section on market failures. And you would have noticed that the minimum wage, I hope you can remember, was it set above or below the equilibrium wage? It was set above the equilibrium wage. So that means workers will now be earning more, those that qualify for the minimum wage. Remember, the minimum wage does not apply to your CEOs or your very highly skilled people that are earning a lot of money. It really is a redistributive mechanism to help work at the lowest skilled level, so your poorer workers, grade 12s. So if the equilibrium wage is less than the minimum wage, how is that going to benefit workers? Right? Let's see what we could have said for that answer. Grade 12s, please take note. This question is for 2 marks. You are not going to write all of this. You are going to choose one of these. But I wanted to give you as many ideas and options as possible so that you can have them in your toolkit when you go into your final exam at the end of the year, so that you've got as much knowledge as possible to draw on. So let's see what options we could have said. Workers can afford more goods and services. The standard of living of workers will increase because they're earning more. It will lead to redistribution of income towards lower skilled workers. Workers will have more bargaining power when negotiating wages with employers. because the employer will not be able to pay them less than the minimum wage. They will be able to use that as their starting point in negotiations. Remember, this is law, grade 12s. It's illegal, as it is in this last point, to pay someone less than this. And that is the last point. Workers will not be exploited by employers wanting to pay them below the minimum wage. Please choose one of those that resonates with you and that's the easiest for you to remember, and jot it down as your answer to this question. All right, everybody. I hope you have one of them down. Remember, you're not wanting to write them all down. It's a 2-mark question. Right, the last one for question 10. How successful has the government been in redistributing wealth? So grade 12s, you can either say the government has not been successful, and you can say why, or you can say the government has been successful when you get this type of a question. So the state and the government have put various measures in place that have been quite successful in redistributing wealth. So those are what I have listed over here. So these are the things that have worked to a greater or lesser degree. Remember, when you get a question about how successful something has been, you may say it has been successful, or you may say it has not been successful. What is most important is that you give the reasons for your answer. That's what the examiners and the markers are looking for. Can you have a point of view about economics and the economic situation in South Africa, and can you back it up by giving reasons? So I would go on the side the government has been quite successful in using redistribution methods, and this is why I say so. Number one, they have used progressive taxation. Remember, progressive taxation means the more you earn, the more you pay. And our income tax system in South Africa, pay as you earn, PAYE, is a progressive tax system. So the wealthy pay more tax than the poor. And what does government do with tax revenue? It uses it to provide services for the poor, to pay social security grants, etc. It redistributes the money. The second way that the government has implemented redistribution in the economy is by using laws or legislation. So examples of that would be affirmative action, broad-based black economic empowerment, land redistribution, housing and property subsidies such as RDP houses. So these are all things the government has done to try and improve the income gap and the wealth gap between rich and poor in the country. I've already mentioned the government pays out social security grants, provision of free services such as free amounts of water and electricity and free schooling for the very poor who can't afford to pay school fees, employment creation programs like the expanded public works program, which I've spoken about already today, and then subsidizing merit goods such as education and healthcare. So you can go to a private hospital and it will cost you a lot less than if you go to a private hospital, because the government has subsidized the cost of providing that service, which means they have paid a part of the cost. So I'll give you a minute just to make some notes. Remember, this is a 4-mark question, grade 12, so you should have 2 full sentences of separate points. So 2 separate points written out in full sentences to answer this question. Grade 12, let's continue on to question 11, which is about ESCOM as an example of a monopoly in the imperfect market. Is it okay for me to continue? If it's not, will someone just pop a message in the type box? Alright, I think it looks like everyone is with me, and we can carry on to question number 11. Alright, so as I said, this is about ESCOM as an example of a monopoly, and it's another question with an extract. Alright, let's read the extract, grade 12. ESCOM 20% hike request like pushing water uphill. So that English phrase, pushing water uphill, means asking for something that's impossible because you can't push water uphill. So the heading of the article or the headline is saying that ESCOM asking for a 20% increase in electricity prices is asking for something that's impossible, like pushing water uphill. Let's read, guys. ESCOM says its liquidity was drastically affected by the below-inflation tariff increase of 2.2% for the 2018 financial year. So for the 2018 financial year, ESCOM's tariffs went up by 2.2%. And ESCOM has said that it's very negatively affected by this. Its liquidity, in other words, the amount of cash it has available to spend, has been negatively affected. The tariff increase of 5.23% for this year, as proposed by NERSA, will further affect the liquidity of the company. Grade 12's NERSA stands for National Energy Regulator of South Africa. National Energy Regulator of South Africa. It'll come up on the next slide. And they are the body which determines whether they grant ESCOM their requested increase in electricity prices. Let's carry on reading. According to the chairman, ESCOM was pushing water uphill in asking for a 20% tariff hike. So I've already explained that. Tariffs are not necessarily the panacea wonder drug. Panacea means the fantastic solution for all ESCOM's problems. However, it is not right to have an acrimonious, that means a very negative relationship. So acrimonious means negative or lots of conflict, lots of fighting. An acrimonious, relentless relationship with the energy regulator. Okay, so that extract. Grade 12s, please remember, if you get an extract in the exam and you see phrases like pushing water uphill or words like panacea and acrimonious that you've never heard of, try and read the extract without those words and see if you can make sense of it. So you don't necessarily have to understand every single word in order to be able to answer the questions. And the first question is a great example of that because it says, why is ESCOM regarded as a price maker? So guys, who can tell me? If you could type in the chat box, I'm sure you would all be typing, but the answer is because ESCOM is a monopoly. Remember, a price maker occurs in the imperfect market. ESCOM and a monopoly is an example of an imperfect market. Remember, the opposite of this would be a price taker, which is what we would find in the perfect market, where the perfect competitor has to accept the market price as set by the market. They cannot set their own price. Remember, ESCOM can set its own price. So that's the first question. The second one I've already mentioned. Who's the regulator for energy at NERSA? And if you haven't heard of that before, it stands for National Energy Regulator of South Africa. And then our definition question, briefly describe the term imperfect market. This occurs if any one of the conditions of a perfect market is not met. And then I'll just do the next one and then give you a minute to take everything down. Briefly describe the nature of the product offered by Eskom. So remember, previously in our multiple choice questions, we spoke about the product offered by a monopolistic competitor, which was a differentiated product. We looked at burgers and toothpaste and hand soap. So what is the nature of the product offered by Eskom? It is a unique product and there are no close substitutes. So there may be substitutes, but they are not exact substitutes. They are not close substitutes. All right, I'll give you a minute, take your notes on that, and then we'll do the last question for question 11. All right, everybody, let's continue to question 11.2.5. The question reads, why, in contrast to a typical monopoly, does Eskom not realize a profit over the long run? So grade 12s, remember, if a monopoly is making a loss in the short run or is only making a normal profit, because it is the only supplier in the market, it can withhold supply, which means reduce the quantity that supplies to the market, which will push up price, or it could just increase the price if it has the ability to do that. That would enable it to make an economic profit in the long run. And that is what happens with many monopolies. But with Eskom, that has absolutely not been the case. Year after year in the national budget, the Minister of Finance has to use money that could have been used for service delivery to bail out Eskom, which means to rescue Eskom and to give it some money. So the question is asking, why is that the case? Grade 12s, please remember again that this is only a 4-mark question. And what are we looking for in a 4-mark question? We are looking for 2 full sentences, each sentence with a separate point. So the answer I'm going to put up has more information than that. And again, that's just to give you as many resources as possible, and you can choose what you would like to put down as your 2 points. And then I've also put this diagram up here. These around the side here are all the excuses, in inverted commas, that Eskom has made, okay, for South Africa's power crisis. But what the cartoonist is saying is that the main reason for Eskom's failure is poor planning and mismanagement. So sometimes it helps to have a picture. Here is what you could have put for your answer, everybody. Remember, you want 2 full sentences. Eskom is a government monopoly. I just wanted to highlight that government monopolies are known as state-owned enterprises. So you may see that term in an exam. That's what it means, a government monopoly. It has experienced losses due to state capture, and we've discussed that already today, corrupt officials, mismanagement, overstaffing, and improper deals. So those would be some of the answers you could put down. Others would include building 2 new coal-fired or coal-powered power stations which have run over budget and are not working properly yet, electricity theft, municipalities which do not pay their bills, neglected maintenance leading to constant breakdown, which is load shedding, which we have all experienced. So you could put any 2 of those down. And then the last point I've got here is that government's financial help contributes to a large extent to the survival of this parastatal. So there's another word for you, parastatal. That's another word for a state-owned enterprise or government monopoly. All right, I'll give you some time to take that down, grade 12s, and then we'll go on to question 12. All right, grade 12s, I'm going to continue. I hope you've all got down what you need to, your 2 sentences, giving the reasons that Eskom has not made a profit, an economic profit over the long run. So we have 3 more microeconomics questions before the essays, and we only have about 25 minutes left. So let's see if we can finish these 3 questions. Remember, the essays are just your model essays, and your teachers have those for you. They have been distributed by the curriculum advisor. So it's just really a case of studying them, and I just had a few tips on how to tackle your essays. But let's see if we can finish these next 3 data response questions. Again, if I'm going too fast, can someone just type in the type box and let me know? But otherwise, let's continue on to question number 12. All right. This was just another cartoon which I found about reasons for Eskom's failure. And grade 12s, this relates very much to your section on problems of public sector provision of goods and services, and also reasons for public sector failure. So if you look at things here, we can see corruption, bad decisions, shoddy workmanship, poor management, dodgy connections. All right, so these are all things that relate to that topic of yours. Cadre deployment, that means jobs for friends and pals. All right. Sometimes overstaffing, there's another one. Employing too many people, and it's not necessary. So sometimes a picture can help us. But let's continue. Right. Question 12, everybody. So you have this table here. Remember what I've said, when you get a source, just spend a little time making sure you understand what they're showing you in the source. So in this data, we've got a column with quantity, we've got our average cost, we've got our average variable cost, and we know that this has always got something to do with the shutdown point, and we've got marginal cost. Right, so let's go through questions. Identify the quantity where average cost equals marginal cost. So that's quite easy. There, average cost is 14 and marginal cost is 14. So my answer is going to be 8. So for question 12.2.1, my answer is 8. Okay, does everyone see that? Right. Next question, everybody. Where would the marginal cost curve intersect the average variable cost? So they are asking me, where is marginal cost and average variable cost the same? At what quantity? And that's at a quantity of 6. Can you see that average variable cost is 10 and marginal cost is 10? Right. So I just want to keep the table up while we were doing those two questions. Our third question is our definition. Briefly describe the term marginal cost. So marginal cost grade 12s is the amount by which total cost increases when one extra unit is produced, or you could say the extra cost of producing one additional unit of output. So remember, you just want to choose one of those. All right, let's look at the next question. So those three questions are quite straightforward, and I'm hoping you are noticing the pattern, grade 12s, that the first three questions can be quite straightforward, and then the next two require a little bit more application. So let's look at 12.2.4. Why would the perfect competitor consider shutting down his business at a quantity of 6? So let's go back here. If I have a look at a quantity of 6, can you see that is where average variable cost equals marginal cost? That is the lowest point of the average variable cost curve. Can you guys also see that? And we know that the lowest point of the average variable cost curve is the shutdown point. So grade 12, a quantity of 6 is the shutdown point, because that is the lowest point of the average variable cost curve. Below this quantity, the firm would not be covering its average variable costs. So how do we put that into an answer? At a quantity of 6, marginal cost equals average variable cost. This is the shutdown point. You remember from our previous question, the firm is not covering its total costs, but only its average variable costs. It cannot continue like this in the long term. So the business will be unable to cover its average variable costs at a quantity less than 6. So in other words, it's no good the firm trying to reduce the quantity it produces, it's still not going to cover its average variable costs. And that is because at a quantity of 6, we have reached the shutdown point, the lowest point on the average variable cost curve. So 12, I hope that is clear, that last question. I'll just give you another little bit of time to continue taking down, and then we'll quickly go back to the table. Remember, this is a perfect competitor grade 12, so it has no control over its price or its average revenue. The only thing it can do is control its costs. But if you have a look at the table in front of you, if it tries to reduce its production, its average variable cost is going to increase to 18. And we are presuming that the price that it's getting is going to remain the same. So this firm will not be able to cover its average variable costs, even if it tries to shut down to reduce production. Alright, and then the last question, 12.2.5, is draw the supply curve using the information above. Right, let's tackle that one, everybody. So here's the graph. I've put it alongside the table. Now let's see how we would actually do this, grade 12. So the first thing, you know that quantity is always plotted on the x-axis. Can you see that we start plotting at a quantity of 6? That is because this is the shutdown point. And the supply curve of a perfect competitor is the marginal cost curve above the shutdown point. So that's the first thing. What goes on my x-axis? Okay, it's quantity. Where do I start drawing my graph from my supply curve? Because that is what the question is asking. Well, the supply curve starts at the shutdown point. So I must start at a quantity of 6. Okay, so that's the first thing. Now, what about the y-axis? Grade 12's price is given by the figures in the marginal cost column. Why? Because we know that for a perfect competitor, marginal cost equals marginal revenue and marginal revenue is equal to price. And the firm is going to always produce at a quantity where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. So we can use those figures on our y-axis. So, at a quantity of 6, my price is 10 Rand. Okay, that is my marginal cost. There we go, 10 and 6. At a quantity of 8, my price would be 14. So that would be my second point there. And at a quantity of 10, my price would be 16, so that would be my third point there. So I'm just going to plot those 3 points. Okay, so just think about that for a minute. So you can see just by doing that, you've already got 2 marks. There's 1 mark for the marginal cost curve and 1 mark for the supply curve. So here's my marginal cost curve, and I have labeled this as the supply curve. Now there are 2 other important things I must put on here. I must put on the average variable cost curve because that indicates the shutdown point. I do not have, on step 3, sorry, I'm just doing them the other way around. I don't have to plot the average variable cost curve, but the lowest point must be here. Okay, so however I draw it, the lowest point of average variable cost has to be at a quantity of 6. Alright? And then the last thing I'm going to do is put on my average cost curve. And again, as I've said here, you pay attention to the intersection with the marginal cost curve because that's the supply curve and that's what the question is asking me to do. So I'm not going to plot the whole of the marginal cost, the average cost curve, sorry. I'm just going to make sure that it intersects the marginal cost curve here at a quantity of 8. Okay, that is the lowest point of the average cost curve. So what they're really wanting to see is, do you know that quantity of 6 is the shutdown point, and that's the lowest point of the average variable cost curve, and a quantity of 8, that is the lowest point of the average cost curve. Quite a complicated question, grade 12. I think that's a fairly difficult one. But what they are really testing is this plotting of supply curve. So even if you could just have done that, you could have still got 2 out of 4. Even if you couldn't put in the average variable cost and the average cost curve. And all they're wanting there, as I said, is steps 2 and 3 here, which is the bottom 2 points of the average cost and the average variable cost curve. don't know if there are any questions that you'd like to ask me about 12.2.5, everybody. Okay, I'll just give you a little bit more time to make sure you've got all the information down that you want. All right, everybody. Let's carry on, if that's all right. Is there anyone that wants to pause a bit longer on this slide? Okay, we're all good to go. On to question number 13. All right. Sorry, I just labeled that the shutdown point. Okay, so this is a more traditional question that you would be more familiar with. Again, it's a graph for the perfect market. You guys should all be familiar with these two graphs alongside each other, right? The industry graph and the graph for the individual business in a perfect market. So the first question should be easy peasy, 1 mark. Which market structure is depicted above? Remember, the word depicted means shown, grade 12, shown above. And the answer is a perfect market or perfect competition. And what is the market price at which the business will sell its product? So how do I work that out, grade 12s? Remember, I'm looking for my profit maximization point, which is where marginal cost intersects marginal revenue. If I have a look on this graph, here's my marginal revenue curve, here's my marginal cost curve. That is where the two intersect. So it's price 50 Rand at point B. Okay, 50 Rand at point B. And the third question is, describe the term opportunity cost. Right, so let's go to that. So perfect competition was the answer to our first question. You know this because of the horizontal demand curve of the individual producer, how you can tell it's the perfect market. And what is the market price? The market price is 50 Rand. How do you know this? You know this because this is the original equilibrium where supply is equal to demand. Let's go back to the graph. Can you see on this graph there's an S curve and an S1 curve? So where S intersects D over here at point B, I can go straight along to here and I can see that that is 50 Rand. Okay, so that's my market price, my original equilibrium price. Alright. Okay, so I hope everyone's got that down. Good competition and 50 Rand. Right, next definition, or next question is our definition question. Briefly describe describe the term opportunity cost. So this is something actually you would have come across in grade 10, but it comes up again in market failures, where we have limited cost-benefit analysis, which is at the end of the section on market failures. When a business or a firm or the government has limited resources and they have to decide how to spend those resources, there's always going to be something that they give up, and that's what the opportunity cost is. So opportunity cost is the value of the next best alternative given up. Okay, but what does that mean? So here we've got a diagram. Because of scarcity, children and adults or businesses, firms, governments, consumers, individuals cannot have all the things they want. They have to make choices. Okay, so that's a key part of opportunity cost. When we choose between two things, the thing we give up, the thing we don't choose is our opportunity cost. So this girl is choosing between a dress and a t-shirt, and because she did not buy the t-shirt, that's her opportunity cost. It's the value of the next best alternative given up. As it says here, it's the thing you did not choose. Okay, so that's just a bit of a refresher for you. This comes up in the section on cost-benefit analysis, because we want to have the most efficient use of our resources. All right, in the next question, everybody, I hope it's okay for me to go on. Let me just pause for a minute. I know we're nearly done. Can we just finish question 13, everybody? Hope that's okay. Let's just finish question 13. So the next question, 13.2.4. says, why will the individual business not produce more than 100 articles? So let's just go back to our graph. Okay. So I can see on this graph over here that point B is my profit maximization point, where marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue. If I produce more than 100 articles, so at any point to the right of point B, my marginal cost is going to be greater than my marginal revenue, and I'm going to be making a loss on every additional unit that I produce. So let's put that into a sentence. So marginal cost is greater than marginal revenue at a quantity greater than 100 articles, which means the firm will make a loss for each additional unit produced after a quantity of 100. Or if you want to say it another way, the additional cost to produce the next unit, which is the 101st article, marginal cost, is higher than the revenue received for the additional unit, and that would be your marginal revenue. So you could choose either one of those two sentences. Remember, it's 2 marks. I want one full sentence. All right, everybody, let's do the last question before we wrap up. I am aware of time, but if we could just finish this question, seeing we are busy on it, that'd be great. So 13.2.5 says, use the information in the graphs to explain how the change in supply in the industry will lead to a normal profit for the single business. So if you have a look at the graphs I've got, I've put that second supply curve in, which I don't think you have on your question. So maybe what you can do, grade 12s, is just put that second supply curve in there. The coordinates are given for you. a price of 30 Rand and a quantity of 15. But just so that it's clear for you, put that second supply curve in. So what's happened here is there's been an increase in supply. Remember, that happens in a perfect market. In a perfect market, the businesses make an economic profit in the short run. That encourages new producers to enter the market, and that increases the industry supply. And when that happens, price drops. And in the long run, the individual business will end up making a normal profit, which you can see over here. Okay, it will end up making a normal profit. If we had to look at the intersection of that marginal cost curve with the price, which is average revenue, marginal revenue of 30, more or less there where the dot is, okay, they will end up making a normal profit. Right, so let's put that into a sentence or two. Right. Firms in the industry are making an economic profit at a price of 50 Rand. Okay, average revenue is greater than average cost. This will encourage more firms to enter the industry, as they would also like to make an economic profit. When more suppliers enter the industry, the supply curve shifts to the right. So that's the new supply curve that I asked you to draw in. Quantity will increase to 15, and the new equilibrium price will be 30. Guys, remember, in a perfect market, the firms are price takers. So the individual firm will have to accept the new price of 30 Rand, and the demand, marginal revenue, average revenue curve will move down to 30 Rand. Normal profit will now be made where average revenue is equal to average cost. And this is the position for the perfect competitor in the long term. So what they're asking you here is the long-term position of the perfect competitor, which is a position of normal profit compared to the short term where it's economic profit. So let me leave that up for you to take down. Grade 12s, I am more than happy to stay on and complete the last data response question if you guys would like to. It shouldn't take us too long. It's got a monopoly graph, which we haven't really looked at yet. But let me just give you some time to do this. All right, everybody. I'm not sure if you've all got that down. If we can move on to do the last data response question, which involves a monopoly graph. Then there would you'll see in your paper there are 4 essays. But there's not really too much to discuss with the essays because remember these are model essays which you do have access to. But I think seeing there's just one question left, let's continue and complete question 14. All right. Maybe just give you another minute and then we can go on to question 14. All right, everybody. If anyone wants me to still pause a bit longer, please let me know. But otherwise, let's go on and do our last Section B question. So I hope you guys really have a good feel for how these questions are asked, for the structure of the question. Should really make you feel a lot more secure when you go into your exam, knowing exactly how the question is going to be structured. It really does help. Right, question 14, everybody. So this is a graph of a monopoly, an imperfect competitor. And the first question says, identify the quantity where optimum production will take place. So grade 12s, it doesn't matter which of the market structures we are looking at, whether it's a perfect market or a monopoly or monopolistic competition. Production always takes place where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. Now on this graph, you may see it says L. L just means long term. If you see an S in front of the letters A, C or MC, it just means short term. So don't be thrown off or get worried about that. So I find my marginal cost curve, there it is. For a monopoly, my marginal revenue curve always lies below the demand or average revenue curve. So if I find the intersection of marginal revenue and marginal cost, they want to know the quantity, and I go down to my x-axis, I will see the quantity is 50. So that is the answer to question 14.2.1. The quantity is 50. How do I know that? It's because that is where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. What type of market is illustrated above? It's a monopoly, an imperfect market. And then describe the term natural monopoly. Remember grade 12s, we get artificial monopolies and natural monopolies. So question number 14.2.1, the answer is 50. We've discussed how you know that. 14.2.2, the answer is a monopoly. You know this because of the relatively steep downward sloping demand curve. Remember that for monopolistic competition, there is also a downward sloping demand curve, but it will be much flatter. Okay, so your monopoly just has a steeper downward sloping demand curve. Right. What is my definition for a natural monopoly? So grade 12's a natural monopoly is a monopoly like Eskom. Okay, why do they exist? They exist because there are high development or start-up and maintenance costs, which means it's very difficult for new businesses to enter that industry. Second reason that we have a natural monopoly. A single business can serve the whole market at a lower price due to economies of scale. And I have got a slide on economies of scale for you. What does economies of scale mean? There are high fixed costs which can be spread out through economies of scale. Okay, remember economies of scale mean as you expand your production, your average costs decrease to a minimum. And the third point under natural monopolies, the industry does not earn enough revenue for competition to be sustainable because many smaller businesses will not be able to benefit from economies of scale. That should be will. Not be able to benefit from economies of scale. So, because of time, grade 12s, remember it's a 2-mark question. This first sentence would be sufficient. For a natural monopoly, high development or start-up and maintenance costs prevent others from entering the market. And then if you want to just make a note for yourselves about economies of scale, you may do so. All right, 2 more questions. The next one is quite a common question that is asked when it comes to monopolies, and it would also apply to monopolistic competition, grade 12s. The question says, explain why the marginal revenue curve will always lie below the demand curve in this type of market. Okay, let's go and have a look at that answer. Maybe just give you another 30 seconds with this one to make sure that you guys are okay. Right, let's go on to the last 2 questions, everybody. This was just a slide to explain economies of scale to you. So very briefly, economies of scale means the more you make of something, the less it costs because your costs are spread out. And the reasons it happens, you can buy in bulk. I'm sure you're all familiar with buying in bulk when you go to the shops to do the grocery shopping. Businesses can do the same. You can spread your fixed costs like your rent and insurance. You can specialize the more you make. Banks are willing to give you cheaper loans, which again reduces your costs. And because you are specializing, you can improve your production processes. So this is what economies of scale would look like. Your long run average cost decreases over time. Right, but we are over time, so let us just continue. Guys, why will the marginal revenue curve always lie below the demand curve? The reason is, the monopolist has a negative sloping demand curve. Okay, guys, you know that if you look at your demand curve, which you did in grade 10, as price goes down, the quantity demanded goes up and vice versa. So that means for a monopolist, more goods can only be sold at lower prices. Price must be lowered to sell an additional unit. Therefore, total revenue increases by smaller and smaller amounts, and the marginal revenue curve lies below the demand curve. This part over here is really just a bit of an explanation. So your answer for 2 marks, grade 12s, remember we want 1 full sentence. The negative sloping demand curve means that more goods can only be sold at lower prices. Hence, additional revenue increases by smaller and smaller amounts, and the marginal revenue curve lies below the demand curve. And the next answers on the next slide, because it's a calculation. So I will just leave this up for a minute. So remember, you're just focusing on this top part as your answer. This bottom part you can just read through. That's just explanation. All right, everybody. I hope you've got that down. Let's do our last question, which is 14.2.5, and the question says, calculate the profit or loss of this market. And can you see it says there show all calculations. So again, you're not going to get the full 4 marks just for giving the answer. You must show the calculation because there are marks allocated for the calculation. So remember grade 12's profit or loss is the difference between average revenue and average cost or total revenue and total cost. So using those two different sets of figures, there are actually 2 ways that you could answer this question. There are 2 methods that you could use. So let's just quickly go back to our graph. Right. So remember, this is my profit maximization point. At my profit maximization point, what is my price? Remember, price is read off the demand curve. So here's my demand curve. So I've got to go to my quantity of 50, which is how much I'm producing, because that's the quantity where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. And I go up, 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 up until I intersect the demand curve, which is also the average revenue curve. So that gives me my price or my average revenue, which is 150. And then to work out my average cost, I again am working with the quantity of 50, and I go up until I intersect the average cost curve, and that is 100. So I now have my average revenue, which is 150, and my average cost, which is 100. So let's see how I could do these calculations. Right, so method 1. I can say my unit profit, so my profit per item that I produce is average revenue minus average cost, which is 150 minus 100, which is 50. What is my total profit or loss? I've got to take my unit profits times my quantity. Remember, my quantity was 50. So 50 times 50 is 2,500 Rand profit. Or I could say my formula for profit is total revenue minus total cost. Total revenue is price times quantity, which is 150 times 50, which is 7,500. What is my total cost? It's average cost times quantity, which is 100 times 50, which is 5,000. Remember, my formula for profit is total revenue minus total cost, which is 7,500 minus 5,000, which is 2,500. So you can use either of those 2 methods to get to the answer of 2,500 Rand profit. All right. I'll just give you another little bit of time to get that down, and then we will wrap up. While you're taking that down, grade 12s, in the question paper that you have, you'll see that there are 4 essays. Remember, those are model essays, and our curriculum advisor has distributed those to us as teachers. So your teachers will have those model essays. And in the question paper, the structure of the essay is also given to you. And I did talk about that briefly this morning. All right. Alright, I hope it's fine for me to go on from this slide. I hope you've got one of the methods down. Alright, so I'm not going to go through this again. It's really important to learn your model essays, grade 12s. I've already told you to answer only one of the questions. Remember what it says here in bold. Your introduction is going to be the definition of the topic. Then you've got your main body, which is 26 marks. Remember, you can score 8 marks, but you know your headings. Okay, remember, headings carry 1 mark each, and it's a maximum of 8 marks for headings in your essays. So that's also something very important for you to remember. The additional part is more difficult. That would be like that question we had on how successful has government's redistribution policies been. It can require you to have outside knowledge of the world. You may need to evaluate successes or failures. So this is quite difficult, and you never know really what you are going to get. So your focus is doing your introduction, which is a definition of what you're discussing, your body from the model essays, taking note that you can get 8 marks for the headings, and then your conclusion for 2 marks. Do not repeat what you've already written in your body, but you can talk about a solution for the topic or how to improve the situation that's been discussed in the topic, and that's for 2 marks. Alright, so that is your essay. The structure of the essay you guys have already, so you can read through that. It is in your question paper. And I'm not going to go through all the essays. They are simply the model essays. So what we're going to end off with today is this slide of useful resources, everybody. Remember, I did mention to you that you can get the Mind the Gap study guide online, and there are also Mind the Gaps for other subjects. The examination guidelines which I mentioned, which are drawn up by the examiners and really are your Bible for the year in terms of being your absolute guide as to what to study in detail and what is less important. There are past matric papers and marking guidelines, which is the answers, from 2016 to 2020 on the WCED portal. You can go onto the Department of Basic Education website and get past papers going right back to 2008. The WCED portal also has video lessons which you can watch and weekly lessons with notes and activities. So, I don't know, you probably have your cell phones out if you want to take a picture of this so that you can just make a note of these useful resources to help you. But really, guys, I'd like to just end off by reminding you the keys to success in your economics are your definitions and your concepts. You've seen how much they come up as we've been working through these questions today. And then your model essays. Remember, your essay is 40 out of your 150 marks. If you do really well in your essay and you know your concepts and definitions, you really have laid an excellent foundation for yourself to be successful. Alright, I'm sure someone by now has taken a photo of that which they can share, which is absolutely fine. So you don't have to worry about, or a screenshot, maybe one of the teachers, you don't have to worry about taking it down. So guys, just to wrap up from my side, and I am going to put myself onto camera now, but just my last slide. Really good luck to all of you guys. Keep calm, don't panic in the exam. And remember that hard work puts you where good luck can find you. And just the last point on the essays, remember you don't have to learn in paper 1 all the macro essays and all the economic pursuits essays. If you love macro and you're familiar with it, you just learn the macroeconomics essays. One of them will come up. Or if you love the economics pursuits essays, you learn all of those. One of them will come up. So that's another way to help you. And remember, your model essays are summaries of your work. So they really are an excellent resource. So let me pop my, no, that's not right. Pop myself onto camera and just to say, guys, well done for giving up your time on this cold and wintry day. I hope that it was worth it. I hope it was useful. I hope you learned something. I hope you practiced. And yeah, I hope you take something away from this that will help you to achieve the best that you can do at the end of the year. And that really is my wish for all of you that are working so hard under such difficult conditions, is just to persevere, do the best that you can do, and absolutely hold on to all those dreams and goals that you set for yourself, because it's absolutely possible to achieve them. So that's it from my side, guys. Well done. Thank you. Go safely, be safe, stay safe, and all the best for the end of the year. Bye.